Hello everyone. In this video we'll be creating quick Proxmox VMs like in Linode or DigitalOcean using Proxmox API with Kotlin language and Cloud Init. Except that we'll be using a CLI for this one and I'll be making GUI for this in the future. Now let's take a look at the demo. So when we run this project, we'll get an interface like this. So for the image I'll choose Arch. Now I'll choose an version. Next I need to choose the size that I want. So I'll be going with this one. Now I need to paste the SSH key. So this is the public key that I want to be in the VM. Next, for the name of the VM, I'll keep it simple. Enter the VM ID. Make sure this is not already allocated to any other VM. Enter the IP address for the VM that you want. I'll keep it this and enter the gateway. Now once I press enter, the VM will be getting created. Now let's take a look at the Proxmox interface. As you can see, the VM is already created. Now it will attach some disk, configure and start the VM once all is done. Let's wait for that. Since the VM is created now, let's type SSH into it. I'll enter the username at the IP that we choose and use the SSH key. Let's wait for some time since the SSH service is not started yet. Now let's try it again. Press yes, and as you can see we are in the VM. Let's quickly install fast fetch and check the details. Before that we have to update the packages. Now let's install the fast fetch. As you can see we have got 2 CPUs, 2 GB of RAM and 50 GB of storage. Let's verify with that. We had entered the 0th option, that is 2 CPUs, 50 GB of storage and 2 GB of RAM. So this is the demo. Now let's move on to the actual part. Now we'll look at the prerequisites that needs to be done on the Proxmox before we get started with the Proxmox API. First of all, we need to get the Proxmox domain name. For that, either you can use the shell feature here or SSH into this machine. So I'll be using the SSH. Once you're logged in into your Proxmox machine, get the host files that is present under HC hosts. So here you can see this is the domain of my Proxmox VM. So take a note of this and keep it somewhere. We'll use this shortly. Next we need to get the API token from the Proxmox. For that we'll go into the data center, click on API tokens and click on add. We'll keep the user as root for now. Give some name for the token ID. I'll keep it and untick the privilege separation here and click on add. Copy both of these values and keep it somewhere. Once you have copied, close this dialog. Now we have to do some settings in the content type of the Proxmox. So if you click on the local storage here and check here, you may not find disk image or import here. So to enable that, get to the shell of your Proxmox instance. We open the file that is present under HC, PVE and storage.cfg. So make sure you include both these words here, that is import and images. We don't need snippets as of now. Since I was testing with it, you don't need to enter it for now. And make sure you include also the import statement here. And rest of this would be already present here. Enter that and save and exit the file. Now we need to create the import folder to store the cloud images that we'll be downloading. So go to the directory of var lib and we need to go into vz. Create the directory named import here. Since I already created it here, I don't need to do this. So once you create the import directory, cd into it. Now as you can see, I have already downloaded the images that I need and I'll be using it very frequently. So to download these images, you can go on to your respective distros cloud images page. Like suppose if you want Debian cloud images, look for this type of link and as you can scroll down, we need to choose a version of the Debian. I'll go with the bookworm and we'll choose the latest one. Click on latest and as you can see, we need to choose the correct architecture and correct file here. I am using AMD64 and also we need to use the qcow2 file. So copy the link of this, go to the shell and use wget or any other tool to download this file. Since I have already downloaded it, I'll leave it as it is. Once you download all the files that you need, we'll move on to the next step. Now I will show you two ways on how to create the VM using the Proxmox API. One will be using a REST API client and another one will be using Kotlin. So those of you who want to use the API in a different language can follow the API client pathway, and rest all can skip to the section where you need it. I'll put the timestamps below. Now let's move on to the API client to see how the API will be used. Now we'll look at how to interact with the Proxmox API using the REST client, that is Insomnia. So navigate to the Insomnia official page and click on download for Windows, or if you are using any other operating system, navigate to the official GitHub repository of Insomnia, and under the releases pages you can find different type of packages for your needs. Once you have downloaded and installed it, you need to download the JSON file which contains all the requests that I created. For that, navigate to my repository that is under the name of Proxmox Quick VM. I'll provide the links in the description. There you will find this file, that is insomnia import.json. Download this file by clicking on this icon here. Once downloaded, open the Insomnia client and you'll be asked to create an account, but you can use Insomnia locally by skipping that. Once you are at this interface, click on Sketchpad and click on import. Choose the files and choose the file that you downloaded, that is insomnia import.json. Click on scan and click on import. As you can see, here you can find all the API endpoints that I used. There are two things that you need to do before using this collection. Click on the Proxmox folder, click on headers and replace with the token that you copied earlier, that is the API token that you created at Proxmox. Paste it like this, and the other thing is click on environment and change the domain here that we copied earlier. So mine is pv.example.com. Once you have got the domain of your Proxmox instance, make sure you add it to the host file of your system from where you will be accessing the API. Now let's edit the file. Sudo vim host, enter your sudo password and make sure you add your IP of the Proxmox instance and also the domain, so that when you access the pv.example.com, it points to the appropriate domain. Save and exit the file. So after you entered, you can test the endpoint if it's working correctly. Also another thing to note, since Proxmox is using the self-signed certificates, it won't be accepted by Insomnia and it will cause some errors. So for that, click on preferences and go on to untick validate certificates. This will make sure that the certificates won't be checked and it will let through. So to test the endpoint, we'll choose a simple one like get all VM. For that we are using this endpoint, and this is the location URL of the Proxmox host. So once you are here, press Ctrl and enter or press the send button here. As you can see, we get the data. Now you can say that the API is working perfectly. I am using this client because of not having to log in to use the local stuff, since I don't need any sync features. Now let's explore the important parts that we will need to create the VM quickly. First is the create VM endpoint. So it will be using this endpoint and the body will be sending some JSON. First we'll be sending VM ID and then we send the memory that we need, CPU cores and name of the VM and the network interface. You can add more than one network interface, like adding net 0 and then net 1, net 2, like that. If you want more information on Proxmox API documentation, you can go to the Proxmox API viewer and also the Proxmox API documentation. So this is where all the endpoints are listed, like nodes, and then we need to go to QEMU like here and click on post. So here we can see create or restore a virtual machine, and we can find here net 0. So this will be an integer, and net 0, net 1, net 2, and here you can see specify network devices. Here you can specify the bridge or firewall, etc. Now we'll create the VM with these details. So for that, press Ctrl and enter, or you can use the send button here. Once the data is received, it will give a UPID. This is like a task ID. You can check the status of this by using another endpoint that is present here, get task details. Let's not go into that for now. After we created the VM, we have to attach the disk that is we have downloaded earlier. So I have downloaded this already. So let me change this This syntax is already present in the API viewer documentation, so you can refer it from there, and make sure that you specify the file name correctly, which you have already downloaded. This is the file that I will be using. I have renamed it for simplicity purposes. So this is Debian 12 image. This is qcout2. Sorry for the mistake there. So this is the file, and I made sure that this file is already present in the import directory that we created earlier. Now we need to press enter, control enter. We can see we get another task detail. We can wait for a short time, and then we'll need to resize the disk. This is the size of the disk that will be size of the root disk that will be created for the VM. We need it to be 10 gigabytes. Also press Ctrl enter here. Now let's attach the Cloud Init drive. This will help us add the Cloud Init data that we need, like IP address, name of the user, and the SSH key. Press Ctrl enter. Next we need to add the Cloud Init data. Here we can set the options like CI upgrade. This option specifies whether the VM gets auto upgraded after the VM is started. We don't need it as of now. We set the user in the VM, and then we pass the SSH keys that we need to be inserted. Make sure you URL encode this SSH key before passing it here, and for that you can use any URL encoder online. Go to the URL encoder, and you can paste your SSH key here and click on encode to get the output here. Once you get the SSH key, paste that here, and then we can specify the IP address details. So this is like the net 0. So here IP config 0 specifies the net 0 details, like we need to specify this address, and this is the gateway. Also we specify the name server if you want. This is optional. Now let's press Ctrl enter. This data is also passed. We need to add serial console so that we can see the output of this VM. Press Ctrl enter. Next we need to set the boot order so that the SCSI 0 drive boots up first. That is the drive that we added here. As you can see, SCSI 0. Set the boot order, and then we start the VM. Also for this, press Ctrl enter. Now let's check if the VM is getting started. For that, I'll open a terminal here. First let's ping the IP address. As you can see, we are getting the ping from the machine. Here you can see also I can log in into the VM. So this is it for the Insomnia part. Now let's move on to the IntelliJ IDE for configuring these exact same steps with Kotlin language, so that we can get more customizations. Now we are going to see how to interact with the Proxmox API with the Kotlin language. For that, first of all, we need to download the IntelliJ IDE, navigate to the official website of the IntelliJ IDE, and download the community edition. For Linux, download the tar.gz file and unzip it in the location of your choice. And once you unzip it, we can navigate into the bin folder, and we can see a file named idea, which is the file that opens the IntelliJ IDEA. What I have done is create a symbolic link in the user bin directory named idea. If you ls-l there, you can see I have created a symlink to the location where I have extracted the tar.gz file. Once you have installed IntelliJ and added the symbolic link, next we need to clone the repo. For that, navigate to the repo for which I have posted the links in the description, and click on code and copy this URL to the clipboard. Navigate into the directory where you want to create the project. Clone the project by using git clone. Navigate into the directory and type idea space dot to open the IDE in the current location. Once the IDE is opened, it will take some time to download all the dependencies, and you can monitor that process down here. It's finished for me. Before you do anything further on, make sure to set the JDK that is configured for this project by clicking on file and click on project structure and set the JDK here. If there are no JDK present, you can download it from here. I click on download JDK, and we can choose the versions here. Don't use 23 for now since it is not compatible with the current Kotlin version here. You can choose anything below that. Make sure to use around 19 since that's what I've been using in this project. The JDK is set, click on apply, and then we can proceed on. So first of all, we have to rename this file to just .env. So we'll click on that and rename, remove the .example part, and we'll edit the values in there. So paste the values that you have noted earlier. I will edit the values here, like my domain is pv.example.com. Next, open the main.kt file under the source main Kotlin directory and we have to change some variables here if you need. So this node represents the name of the node that is under the Proxmox instance. For example, let's go into the Proxmox interface. Here you can see this is the name of the node that is under the data center. So make sure you match this name here in the IDE. I have done that here. Next, these are some variables where the paths are located. If you haven't done anything specific with the volumes in Proxmox, you don't have to change this here. Also, this is just a variable that I have used later in the creation of Cloud Init, and then change the name of the user that will be created in the VM. I have kept it as a variable for now and will change it as a user input in the future. This is the default CPU type that is used in every VM. This will be override by the code in the bottom here. That is, here we have set the CPU to host, because if the input is 4 or 5, that is, we choose the Alma Linux or Rocky Linux, we have to set the CPU type to host because it doesn't support the KVM64 and it gives an error. Next, here we can see I have mapped each and every version to the file name, like 24.04LTS is this file here, and I made sure that every file in here I have downloaded it and kept it in the input directory. We can see that by logging into the Proxmox instance. Let's go to the var lib vz import. As you can see, I have downloaded each and every files and kept it here and mapped these values, file names, to the values that I've created. This code may look very inefficient, and that's because I'm still learning and I'm very new to the Kotlin language. I'll make sure to refactor it in the future. Until then, I have made sure that this code actually works. Next, once I have mapped all the versions to the files, we create the exact methods that we use in the REST API client, that is Insomnia. Like, we first create the VM with all the cores, name and memory and network configuration. Next, we attach the disk and then we resize the disk. We add the Cloud Init drive and pass the data along with it, and we add the console and set the boot order. Lastly, we start the VM. So these functions are defined in another file, that is in the api.kt. First of all, we need to use the .env vault to access the .env file here and the variables inside it. Next, we need to create a method that returns a client with the SSL disabled, and then we'll use the client to communicate with the Proxmox API. This is a code to get all the VMs. I kept it for troubleshooting purposes and I won't be using it for now. Next, we create the function that is create VM, and it will take several parameters like VM ID, node, cores, etc. and it will create a class so that this object can be created and passed on to the API request in JSON format, and then we set it here. Before that, we create the object and then we set the API endpoint. Next, we do the same for attach disk, resize disk, add Cloud Init, and then the start VM, also serial console, and then start VM. So these methods are invoked in the other file, that is main.kt. Once we created all the functions that we need to create and start the VM, we need to actually call them. Like, we waited for a few seconds after sending each request in the Insomnia client. I have simulated that by adding a delay here after creating each function. So the ideal solution will be to get the status of each UPI ID that we get in the response and then check if the status is completed or not. Since that would take some time for me to implement, I have simply created a delay to simulate that. You can increase the delay or decrease it depending on the OS images. Like, for example, Rocky and Alma Linux take more time than other of these images to get attached, so you can do that accordingly. Now, once you are in this file, let's run the demo. Once it is built and run, we get the interface like this. So I'll quickly create an Ubuntu distro, paste the SSH key, name, VM ID, IP, and let's wait for the VM to get created. So this is the UPI ID that I have been talking. So we'll get this UPI ID and check for the status in the future, so that we don't have to wait for not less or not more than the time that is required. Now that every process is completed, let's try to log in into the machine. I'll create a new tab here, SSH, and the username that I specified, put the IP that I've used, and also mention the SSH private key, type yes and press enter. As you can see, I've logged in into the machine. Let's update the repositories. We can see the internet is working. Let's quickly download fastfetch, wget, press enter. Let's install that by using sudo apt install /fastfetch-y. Run it using the fastfetch command. As you can see, we have 2 CPUs, 2 GB of RAM and 50 GB of storage. That's what we have configured in the IDE for the input. Now I'll tell you about the features that are not yet implemented, like having an easier way to download these files and directly putting it into the import directory. Next would be to set the node variable either via user input or using an endpoint automatically in the background. Next we have to handle exceptions, like if the one of the function fails, it should not proceed to the next one. I have not yet implemented that. Even though there are checks here, it doesn't work as expected. Next we need to add a feature for creating a manual size, since these are both predefined and we have to change each time we need to use a new size. One of the main issues is the Fedora version 39 and 40 are not able to access the internet after setting up this way. I don't actually know if it is a Cloud Init problem or this setup problem. I need to change some configurations over here. If you know any solution for that, please comment down. Also, we need to use database to store this information, like a simple database, maybe SQLite or any other which is simple to manage. Also to store the SSH keys that we'll be uploading it, so that we don't have to upload it every time. All the resources that I've used in this video, I'm putting them in the description below. Make sure to check it out. If you found this video helpful, like, share and subscribe to the channel for more such videos. Thank you.